What if I told you that Bitcoin mining now supplies 2% of Finland's residential heating, replacing fossil fuels and accelerating their energy goals? Daniel Batten is back on Bitcoin for Millennials to break down 3 game-changing trends that are rewriting Bitcoin's story in 2025. We'll explore how Bitcoin is heating homes, how pension funds holding trillions are finally joining the party, and how Bitcoin is unlocking real humanitarian power in places where it's needed the most. And the most surprising driver of Bitcoin's next wave? That's the one that isn't really talked about much yet. All right, let's dive in. Yeah, let's just kick it off. Our first topic is Bitcoin mining / energy abundance.
This is a fascinating one because when we think Bitcoin, we think about a monetary revolution. And obviously that's what Bitcoin is. But it's not only a monetary revolution, it's also an energy revolution. And for me, that's equally pronounced, the positive impact that can have on humanity, and equally exciting. And how that's enabled is completely accidental. Because Satoshi never in his wildest dreams could have imagined that in creating a protocol called Bitcoin, which was driven by proof of work, that over time you would need so much energy that you'd have these massive, sometimes publicly listed mining companies who are doing nothing else other than mining Bitcoin, who would be using vast supplies of energy, which would create an industry which was unique in the world that we've never had before. And that's because, Bram, there's not a single other energy industry in the world, apart from Bitcoin mining, where around 80% of your entire expense line is spent on power. We've never had that. And because of that accident, it means that Bitcoin mining companies, unlike any other company in the world, it suddenly becomes economically viable for them to go chasing cheap stranded energy. So I'll give you an example. So I'm the managing partner, as you said, at a company called CH4 Capital. So we specialize in giving infrastructure financing to Bitcoin mining companies who are using landfills emissions as their power source. Sounds pretty niche, right? Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing is that we've known about this issue about landfills leaching gargantuan quantities of methane, which is not only a pollutant, but it's responsible for around 1 million premature deaths every year. It's a contributor to smog, all sorts of horrible things. But we've never had a way to basically wipe out all that methane that makes economic sense. So what people have tended to do is they've just burnt it, they've flared it. But the problem is that unless you have a regulatory stick which is forcing you to do so, then no one's going to flare it because it costs a lot of money. You've got to buy the infrastructure, you've got to buy the flare stack, you've got to maintain them, it's expensive, and it ultimately just wastes energy. So in most places in the world, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, you name it, India, Pakistan, these landfills simply vent directly into the air, huge quantities of pollution / energy. Now, because Bitcoin mining companies have such a large percentage of their budget being power, it's actually worth it for them to go chasing that cheap energy because, as you can imagine, it's not so convenient setting up on a landfill and just hooking up to the grid, right? So why would you do that? Well, the reason you do it is you can get power for 1 cent per kilowatt hour. But to access that power, you've got extra costs. You've got to pay for gas capture and collection. You've got to pay for these huge generators that turn the power from the methane into power. And you've got to purify that landfill gas, that biogas. So it only makes economic sense if 80% of your expenses is power. So these Bitcoin mining companies have found a place on landfills in oil and gas fields using flare gases, using stranded renewable energy, which exists around the world. Wherever you have energy which is renewable, you have stranded energy. Maybe it's from a hydro dam that was built, as all dams are, to deliver for today's capacity. No, to deliver capacity for 20 years' time. So they have way more power capacity than they're using, lots of wasted energy. Or solar and wind farms that were built through government incentives, but without thought about how you transported that energy. So often it just gets wasted. And again, so Bitcoin mining companies are coming into these solar farms, these wind farms, these hydro facilities, these landfills, these oil and gas fields, and they're just soaking up all of that wasted energy. And what happens when they do that? In the case of oil and gas fields and landfills, they're solving a pollution problem. And in the case of these other sources, such as hydro, wind, and solar, they're solving a problem which has stopped these sources of renewable energy being profitable. And as a result, because the utility is getting more power, they're able to redeploy that extra revenue to build out more renewable capacity or to build out more transmission lines to reach more people, which in places like Africa means more rural people who are in energy poverty. So it's facilitating these energy revolutions, both in the West and outside the West, making energy more profitable, lowering electricity bills, which is the opposite of what you might read. But this is absolutely the case. You ask any grid operator who's used Bitcoin mining. In fact, I was talking to a Bitcoin mining company just 2 days ago who said that they were doing some work with a grid operator who said, the reason we're looking at Bitcoin mining is we've done our research and we've realized that we've hit a threshold and we can't put more renewable energy onto the grid unless we have more flexible load to counterbalance its intermittency. And we've done our research and we worked out the best flexible load in the world is Bitcoin mining. So that's why it's leading to these energy revolutions. And it's tremendously exciting because without that, we're going to have to make choices about, well, do we have more renewable energy or do we have more reliable, affordable energy? And Bitcoin says you don't have to make that choice. You can have it all.
When we are talking about where we're at in 2025, I think you are doing the work to share how this is so beneficial. And we're slowly seeing this actually being picked up more in the scientific realm, right?
That's right. And what's happened since last time we spoke is we're starting to see this happening at scale. So, for example, one of the most amazing side benefits of Bitcoin mining is that they produce heat, right? Because they get really hot as they're hashing. In fact, 100% of the energy is transmitted into heat. So if you can capture that heat, you can do some really useful stuff because it turns out that half of the world's energy goes into heating stuff up. Now, obviously, it's not going to produce enough heat to melt steel or to melt silicon, but it can produce enough heat to heat up residential areas or hot water. And so that's tremendously valuable because right now, Finland, not many people know this, but 2% of the district heating, so that's the heating that goes through pipes and heats up homes throughout Finland during the long wintertime, is now supplied by Bitcoin mining. So that's more than 100,000 in total residents are getting their homes heated through the exhaust heat through Bitcoin mining. So Mara is up there. They've done 80,000 homes. There's other companies up there who are doing it as well, doing this amazing work. And the amazing thing is that what's Finland using right now for their district heating? What's their power source? Well, it's coal, gas, a little bit of renewables, and peat, but mostly fossil fuel. So when you're replacing those predominantly fossil fuel, and peat's horrible stuff, it's worse than coal when you burn it. It puts all sorts of carcinogens into the air. So when you replace those heat sources with predominantly clean renewable energy-based heat sources, which are coming from clean electrified energy, it's helping Finland to reach its net zero emission targets by 2030 for district heating. So they love it. And this was covered in a report by Cambridge recently, who said, we found that now Bitcoin mining is 52% using sustainable energy. It's obviating the need for fossil fuel-based heating at scale through heat recycling. There's methane mitigation happening all around the world through companies such as Crusoe back in the day, now companies like Mara and other companies who are doing a lot of methane mitigation in the oil and gas industry, and also companies on landfills. And it's helping to stabilize the grids. And we're getting these really good, robust, independent studies. In fact, we've had 8 of them now, which are saying, this is not from the Bitcoin mining ecosystem. These are independent reports saying, this is solving some really key energy challenges. So there they are.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. My American friends, I've got something for you. If you're into Bitcoin, you want to grow your stack in any way possible. What if you could do it effortlessly just by spending your fiat? The Gemini Bitcoin credit card is designed to help you do just that by giving you instant Bitcoin rewards on every purchase. Just use it like any other credit card and earn back up to 4% on transportation, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. There are no annual fees for this card and no exchange fees to receive your Bitcoin rewards. Sign up to get your limited edition Bitcoin Orange credit card and earn a $200 Bitcoin bonus when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. You can find more information and terms in the description below, or go to gemini.com/Bram to sign up today and start stacking effortlessly. That's gemini.com/Bram.
There was a jurisdiction in Norway that had the really smart idea of saying, let's ban Bitcoin mining. And they did. They banned Bitcoin mining. Within 2 weeks, everyone's power prices went up 20%, widely covered in the media. So we know it in theory, we know it in practice, and we have the receipts to prove it.
Yeah, it's so cool that these topics that I talk about a lot with regard to Bitcoin, for example, that it aligns incentives is something that you see here, right? Like the fact that people have to pay a penalty to discard of the energy that they created with, a project that they already invested in, right? Is just absolutely bonkers, and the fact that also certain principles that have worked before are also working here, right? It's like I have to think of Uber, right? Like Uber identified in the beginning there are like black car drivers in New York City that are hired for a day, but when they drive someone in the morning and they drop them off at their office, they're just hanging out the whole day, right? So they have this asset, this black car, and this person who is neatly dressed and just the experience of a black car, and then they realize that is something that you can monetize, same as with Airbnb if you have spare room, etc. And so here it is the same, right? Like no one ever really thought before about, oh, I can actually sell my methane emissions of my landfill. Like, it is something so new, and I think that is just so fascinating in a sense that this is also quite early, I would say, right? We still have. We have some coverage now that we are talking about it. We also brought this, right? So we mentioned the papers. These are the journals. This is something that you are obviously following, right? But more and more we're getting this coverage of the power of Bitcoin mining, basically. And then if I switch to this one, this is the one that I absolutely love, because when we see all the FUD, right, it is the more transactions are on Bitcoin, or the more people that adopt Bitcoin, the more energy it's going to use, etc., etc. But yeah, maybe you can explain this, because I think this is kind of like the ultimate FUD buster, but also for people that are not really following this is massively interesting.
Sure. So this will help adoption enormously, because in order for the mainstream and large financial institutions to adopt Bitcoin, they have to feel comfortable that it's going to be a net good to humanity. And so the fact we've now got 22 peer-reviewed journals showing that it is net good to the environment, that it does help to stabilize the grid, to accelerate the green energy transition, to mitigate methane, to recycle heat, to obviate gas peaker plants, to make batteries more efficient, to reduce the cost that it takes, the time that it takes to get solar and wind operators profitable. It's tremendously important. So it's been a big part of turning around perceptions and really does increase adoption. And at the same time, what's happened is a lot of those first generation studies on Bitcoin have been widely debunked. There was some papers that suggested, for example, that as hash rate increased and as Bitcoin price increased, that Bitcoin's energy use would go out of control and its emissions would get out of hand. And it's just not the case. And it's not the case for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there were some fundamental flaws in the research. They assumed, for example, that energy came from its transactions. As just about everyone in Bitcoin understands, it does not come from its transactions. It comes from mining it. So you can have 1,000 times more transactions on the Bitcoin network. It doesn't use any more energy at all. They're completely independent. And what this graph is showing is that over a 4-year period, so over an entire halving cycle, price went up 6 times, hash rate went up 8 times, but the amount of emissions stayed static over a full 4-year period. And that happened for 2 reasons. Number one, the use of more efficient machines.
Yes.
But that's right. People tend to forget Moore's law when making these predictions. But the second thing was Bitcoin was migrating to cleaner energy sources. So using predominantly sustainable net zero emission sources of energy now. And so this single graphic has actually helped put a lot of policymaker and regulator minds at rest, because they can see, oh, good, we're not going to boil the oceans from using Bitcoin. In fact, not only that, but if you compare it to the banking network, whereas its computational power goes up from its data center use, emissions don't stay static there. They're not using more renewable energy. Right, they're using the same as they always were, which is grid mix, which might be improving 1% per year, but it's not the accelerated rate that Bitcoin is. And so every time that you're using Bitcoin for a transaction, not the banking network, I would argue that it's actually net emission reducing, because you're migrating to a less emission intensive network. Every time you use Bitcoin rather than gold as a store of value, I would again say it's net emission reducing, because the environmental footprint of gold and its emission intensity is off the charts. It's one of the most dirty energy industries you can possibly imagine. Its environmental impact is devastating. It leaves huge scars on the landscape. And that's just not the case with Bitcoin. It works very synergistically with the landscape, with the environment, and with renewable energy operators. And its emission intensity is way less than gold. So in the same way that you hop in an EV, you're using fewer emissions than if you hop in a fossil fuel-driven car. When you use Bitcoin to transact rather than banking network, you're reducing the net emissions, the net load on the planet.
I remember from our last conversation that we talked about the people having FUD and the haters, and that we should actually love them, right, instead of burning them on Twitter. But with this, I just think like I think this is why I think about Bitcoin every day, in a sense that it is just so ultimately transparent, but also righteous in a certain way, right? Like, it is actually showing that it's a net good for the world in multiple ways. I don't think we have this graph, right? But the current Bitcoin mining sustainability, the percentage is 52%, I think, or maybe it's already higher, right? But it's over 50%. Yeah, like you said, let's look at the banking industry. Like, where are they at? They have their mouth full about ESG and all these things, and we're doing and in their marketing we're doing the best for the world, etc. But are you actually, right? And again, with Bitcoin, this is again really proof of work. It's showing that its incentives again are positively aligned to eventually end up with now currently over 50% sustainable energy resource, right? So I just think it's very cool. The trend here is also up, right? It's progressing. So
correct.
Yeah,
it's getting more and more every single year. And there's no comparison between the banking sector. The banking sector doesn't mitigate any methane. The banking sector doesn't stabilize grids. The banking system doesn't help the profitability of renewable energy. It doesn't obviate fossil fuel. It doesn't do any of those things. It doesn't do heat recycling, and it uses way more emissions, right? So it's tethered to the grid, so it's at the mercy of whatever the grid happens to be. It doesn't incentivize the usage of wasted energy. It doesn't encourage innovation. in the energy sector, and it doesn't help stabilize grids. It doesn't help bring down power prices. So again, when you're using Bitcoin, you have all of those other benefits to humanity that come along, benefits to the environment, benefits to humanity, and benefits to the energy sector that come with it. So every time you're using Bitcoin to transact, you are helping promote a more, I would say, a technology that is more part of the life economy rather than what other people would call the death economy.
Yeah. Maybe one thing to add, right? This also helps what we're talking about. It also helps. This is the literal security of Bitcoin, right? So if Bitcoin gets more adopted, price goes up, more people are incentivized to mine if they can find cheap energy sources, which eventually makes the security go up, and so on, right? So it's a very big part of the flywheel that mining, or using Bitcoin mining for these use cases, for example, when it becomes more popular, it actually helps Bitcoin as the network, right? It makes it more valuable because the security goes up, and so that eventually also helps adoption, as we're now going to talk about, right? So there's this flywheel in this adoption of Bitcoin, and the mining is a very, very big part.
So I first started getting interested in sovereign and pension adoption of Bitcoin because Bitcoin's perceived environmental impact at the time, back in 2022, was a barrier for them being able to adopt it. That's all changed a lot, but still, it's one of the tick boxes they have to get comfortable with. They have to get comfortable with how do we custody the asset. They have to get comfortable with it's not volatile as long as we have a long investment time frame, which you should if you're a pension fund or a sovereign fund. And so I show them the 200-week moving average chart a lot. And they have to get comfortable with the risk-adjusted returns. So I show them the Sharpe ratio chart a lot, comparing it to the stock market. And it's always been higher for its risk-adjusted returns. But they have to be comfortable that it's positive for the environment and it's positive to humanity as well. And this is good for Bitcoin as well, because if you look at institutional capital, the largest pools of capital in the world are tied up in sovereign funds or in pension funds. There's over $60 trillion of assets in those funds. Now, if those funds took Larry Fink's recommendation, they haven't yet, but they will, which is to allocate 3% of their portfolio into Bitcoin, the impact of that on Bitcoin would be gargantuan. I mean, price would be triple where it is today. So obviously there's a big number go up consequence. But there's an even more significant consequence, which is that it normalizes Bitcoin. And it means that once you have those large conservative institutions who are comfortable with it, everyone's comfortable with it from an institutional investment standpoint now. And they will really help to propagate the message amongst their peers about why this is a prudent investment in every fund. So the language is changing from it's risky to include Bitcoin to it's risky not to include Bitcoin. And the reason it's risky not to include Bitcoin is, secondly, well, it's been the best performing asset for the last 10 years. It's had the best risk-adjusted returns for the last 10 years. So if you're looking at other funds, you risk losing people's interest as people get more comfortable with Bitcoin, because they're going to increasingly start asking the question, why are you not including Bitcoin? Look at Vanguard, who failed to have an ETF. Look at the amount of customers that they lost across to BlackRock and others who did have Bitcoin ETFs. And BlackRock, who launched the Bitcoin ETF, now within a year and a half, they have an ETF which is larger than the gold ETF, which took several decades to get to that same size. So you end up losing a lot of potential returns. You end up losing a lot of investor interest. And because year after year after year, you have more Gen Z, you have more millennials who are looking to invest, and they use Bitcoin at a much higher rate than baby boomers do. So you can see what's happening. There's this kind of this curve, right, of people who are wanting digital assets, and they're wanting to get exposure to them at an institutional level as well. And if institutions can't offer them, then they're going to go somewhere else. So it's a risk not to hold Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a tremendous change in mindset around these big sovereign funds and pension funds. And the other interesting thing that's happening is, at a sovereign level, you know the way that most nation states are getting exposure to Bitcoin? It's not through buying it for corporate treasuries. It's through mining it. There are now 10 nations who have got Bitcoin Bitcoin treasuries, right? This is nation state corporate treasuries, and they've acquired it through mining Bitcoin. And why has that proven to be an easier path? Well, the same reason that in the States, they've said we have to acquire Bitcoin in a budget neutral way. So in other words, if they're seen to be using quote unquote taxpayer dollars to buy Bitcoin, that's going to get political pushback. But if they can use it in ways which is budget neutral, then it won't. So mining is the best way to do it because it's completely budget neutral, because you're not buying Bitcoin at all, you're creating it. And if you're doing what Bhutan's doing it, and you're creating it using energy that otherwise would have been wasted because it flowed over the top of the dam, that's just bounty for everyone. And the Bhutan story is incredible. The IMF had all sorts of dire warnings about it destabilizing the country, the economy, and the energy sector. It's all ended up stabilizing all three. And so now people are saying, well, who do we trust? Do we trust the IMF, who have made these predictions that haven't turned out? Or do we trust reality? Do we trust our own eyes? And our own eyes are telling us that Bhutan avoided needing an IMF loan because of mining Bitcoin. Yeah. Our own eyes tell us that they were able to upgrade the airport. They were able to increase their government salaries by 50%, sometimes 70, 65%, through using a small fraction of their Bitcoin treasury. And they now have Bitcoin strategic reserves, which is 40% of their entire GDP. That's massive through mining Bitcoin.
That's Bitcoin maxi territory.
They are the ultimate exemplification of stay humble, stack sats.
Yeah. Maybe that's a side path, but I think countries that are less, let's call them less fortunate on the economic side, but very fortunate on the energy side, like if they start waking up to this, right? I still think that is like an undiscussed geopolitical game theoretic subject, because it can go very fast as well, right? I mean, if Bitcoin goes to 500 million, that 40% is maybe going to be 70%.
Correct.
Right, and this will be a Bitcoin nation.
Already you're getting this copycat behavior. So Pakistan's saying, hey, we want our own Bitcoin national treasury as well. You've got Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan who are also saying it. You've got other countries behind them who are saying, hey, we're watching what's happening in Bhutan. Hey, we have some stranded energy as well. Why don't we mine Bitcoin too? And so suddenly you're seeing multiple nation states saying, we want to copy that playbook. Ethiopia, $220 million the state-owned energy utility earned over a 12-month period through mining Bitcoin. And they're
mining one Bitcoin, for like $21,000 or something. I saw like that number. I don't know if it's correct.
It's a lot less than in other parts of the world because the amount of energy cost is pretty low over there. And absolutely. So what that means is they've got $220 million they otherwise wouldn't have, or they may have had it, but they would have had to export it to another country, but it would have cost them a lot to build out the transmission lines to that other country. So maybe they'd only have 50 million.
Yeah.
But also they would have invested in building transmission lines to take energy away from their country, which means they're not delivering energy to their own people. So what they've done instead is they've got $220 extra million. This is just through the contracts to other Bitcoin mining companies. That's apart from the money they've got mining it themselves, but just in the sale of energy, 220 million. And they've used that to fast track the building out of transmission lines and substations, which means now rural Africa is getting electrified at a faster rate than it would have were it not for Bitcoin mining.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want: Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with StampSeed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, StampSeed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from StampSeed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with StampSeed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order. You know, nation states and pension funds, what we're talking about, they are actually the ones that should have a long-term outlook, right? So that's what they're doing. You perhaps by some definition, you couldn't even call that investing in a sense, right? Because they have a long-term outlook. Especially the pension funds have certain obligations, right, for payments in the future from the people that put money in. So it is so logical that they end up with Bitcoin. But now we kind of also see the intricacies, right, of the first topic we talked about. Like there are certain hurdles that they have to go through. But now that is becoming more and more clear. This is Mohammed El-Arian, who is a well-known professor and like finance guy, says per CNBC reporting, the strategy favoring gold and Bitcoin now has a name. JP Morgan analysts are calling it the debasement trade, and obviously this is something that Bitcoiners have been talking about for years, right? But
more common that people are using that language. Larry Fink has used similar language. Ray Dalio has said that it's a hedge against currency debasement, or Larry Fink has said it's a hedge against the US government defaulting. So people are starting to normalize exactly the things that Bitcoin maxis have been talking about for years and say it's completely legitimate. And if you look at the countries that are adopting Bitcoin, they have two qualities. Number 1 and 2 is UAE and Singapore. And if you look down the list, you see countries like Switzerland, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia. What do all those countries have in common? They have great ease of doing business, and they have very sophisticated financial markets, very advanced. But then you also see countries like Thailand, Vietnam, South Africa, Venezuela, Argentina, Turkey. What do those countries have in common? Well, the last two have hyperinflation, so massive currency debasement. So if you don't have Bitcoin, then what are you going to do? You're just going to watch your pesos or your lira fritter away in value. Or there's countries like Thailand or Vietnam, they have very low trust in the banking sector. And there's a reason for that. That's because the banking sector, and it's been doing a lot of this just over the last 2 months, is freezing a lot of bank accounts. Mm-hmm. Of course, the official reason is we're reducing scams, but they're closing a lot of bank accounts of people who have legitimate bank accounts. Maybe they did some work in Vietnam. Maybe they were digital nomads. They have an account. But now their account's been closed. They can't access it. And the only way they can access it, they have to fly back to Vietnam, and then they have to have a digital ID card, which they don't have. So basically, they just lose their money. And so this is happening. This is rife. And in countries like Lebanon, where you put your money into the bank and good luck if you ever see it again, because they're just closing the doors and saying, no, you can't have it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you're allowed to have 10% of it. So these are countries where you don't have high trust in the banking system, or you don't have high trust in your national currency. And so those are the two flavors of nations that are adopting Bitcoin the fastest. Either they're the most innovative or they're the most desperate. But it's the people in the middle, they're kind of comfortably numb. They're not that innovative, but they're not that desperate either. They're the ones who have really been the laggards in facilitating Bitcoin adoption.
11 countries, I think, have the US dollar as their national currency. Tens, maybe hundreds of millions of people that actually get the reward for their time and energy in a currency that another nation can print infinitely, which is just insane to think about, right? And so the fact that sovereigns are also waking up, not only on the energy side, but also on, you know, the influence of currency side, I would say is very interesting. And I think you shared a report before there, which is this one. So let's just mention it so people can look it up, right? It's from the Bitcoin Policy Institute.
Yeah, I can't understand why this isn't getting more circulated, because it's so important, the work they're doing. But what they've shown is that the level of nation state adoption is way more than what we had imagined, that there's now 56 countries, this is at nation state level, that have some sort of exposure to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. And most of them are doing it through mining, as we said, but also there's a number of pension funds and sovereign funds who have started to adopt Bitcoin in these nation states. So it's incredible. It's much more advanced than you would know if you were to read the Financial Times or the New York Times. So it's actually happening way faster. So it's a classic story where what you're reading on Bitcoin Twitter, in this case, from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, is giving you an insight into what's actually happening. But there's been really crickets when it comes to the mainstream media. It's just not reported at all, for whatever reason. Different nations are looking for ways creatively, based on their own unique circumstances, to gain Bitcoin and to create Bitcoin-friendly regulations. Just today, Thailand removed capital gain tax on Bitcoin. So you can imagine when a whole nation does that, then suddenly a whole lot of people are saying, I wouldn't mind liquidating a little bit of my Bitcoin, but maybe if I was a tax resident of Thailand, that'd be more attractive. And suddenly it's going to attract people to that country. It's going to attract digital nomads. It's going to attract innovation. So these are very smart moves, because, again, we're so early. It's only 3, 4, 5% of the world who have exposure to Bitcoin. But as that rises, the countries who are ahead of the ball in terms of creating these attractive environments that embrace Bitcoin are going to do extremely well, not only through the Bitcoin strategic reserves that build up value, both in fiat-denominated terms and in Bitcoin-denominated terms, but in the talent they can attract to their country.
Yeah, I think two things here. What I find interesting is, and I wonder what you think actually, if you adopt Bitcoin as a country, I think you are also incentivized to start mining, to start securing the network, to having a certain percentage of the hash rate, to later on make sure that whatever transaction you want to go through, you know, will eventually go through, and that
100%.
by accident you also mine your adversaries' transactions, which is the point of Bitcoin, right? I think that is the very, very big picture, is that eventually this is money for your enemies, and you will be incentivized to also mine the transactions of your enemies. But if you want to make sure that yours also go true, you have to start contributing to the hash rate as well, right? Which, as we talked about, kind of adds to that flywheel and makes Bitcoin even more attractive. And second to that, I had a few weeks ago, someone told me that, for example, in the US now that Bitcoin is also in a lot of pension funds, right? Or MicroStrategy is in a lot of pension funds, that now that has been allocated, the political motivation or the opportunity, I would say, to possibly ban, air quotes, a Bitcoin has kind of disappeared, right? It has become an unpopular thing to add to your platform. And I thought it was very interesting, because I never really realized that. But this one election perhaps even did that around the world. Although, you know, I just made a joke, but I think in Europe, the hate for Trump also makes them dismiss Bitcoin, for example, right? Like, oh, he's crazy, then Bitcoin sucks as well, which is kind of fine, because it ties into more like the global game theory. Like, if you stay behind with, you know, the gunpowder example of Saifedean, like, you can discuss whether or not you want gunpowder, but by the time you've made a decision, you have a headshot, basically, and you're too late, right? And so yeah, I think that's also something that is slowly happening. But yeah, what are your thoughts there? Is that something you see too?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. In terms of adoption, the whole neuro association with Bitcoin and Trump it's had some real positives. There's no doubt about it, and it's also meant that some other people have stood at the sidelines. For as you say, for no reason more sophisticated than, well, Trump's using it, he's my enemy, therefore Bitcoin's my enemy, which is crazy. It's like saying back in the day, oh, someone is using the internet who is my political enemy, therefore I'm not going to use the internet. All that's going to happen is you're going to get behind. Your best recourse is to use that for the values you care about, because otherwise your values are not going to be well spread if you avoid the internet. And if you avoid Bitcoin, then you're going to be avoiding, well, firstly, the best asset class of the last 10 years and the next 10 years and beyond. But also all of those things that gives you, all those benefits of Bitcoin by shutting yourself out. So Bitcoin is for anyone who wants to use it. And I think most people understand that. The majority of people around the world can say, well, so what if Donald Trump's using it? So is Bhutan, and they're using it in a more socialist way. A lot of people don't agree with how Bitcoin's using it. They say, what a waste of money putting up government salaries. They should be cutting the number of government workers. Well, that's up to them what they want to do with it. Let them do what they want to do. So people use it in libertarian ways. People use it in conservative ways. People use it in socialist ways. People use it in whatever way they want, which is consistent with their values. It's a tool which is open to anyone who wants to use it. And to say my enemy, my political enemy is using it, therefore I won't, is actually quite funny, I think. And to your earlier point, you're absolutely right. Countries are geopolitically incentivized to mine it so that no country can gain too much of the network securitization ability. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's also something that I heard you talk about on, I think, another podcast where you shared that like the biggest miner in Bitcoin has like 6%, and it's like 5.5%, 5%, etc. We're not talking about pools, right? We're talking about individual companies. And then you mentioned like there isn't any other industry that is actually that decentralized in terms of usually there's like 1 to perhaps 3 players that have, let's say, 80% of a market, right? But in Bitcoin, that is not the case. Can you share a bit about
look at search, for example. How many search engines do you have that people use? You have one, maybe. I don't know. Is there any other search engines? Some people may still use Bing, but there's basically one. Let's look at phones. How many types of phones are there? There's basically 2 or 3 manufacturers of smartphones. So we don't have this massive choice. Let's look at automobile manufacturers, which is much more decentralized. What is the market share of the largest one? Well, it's over 10%. And then if you start to look around the world, these different industries, it's very rare that the largest example of that industry has less than 10% of the entire industry. So when you have Bitcoin and the largest one, the largest 2, number 2 at the moment is Kango, number 1 is Mara, and you're talking 6%, 5.5%. These are tiny amounts relatively. So it's already very decentralized. And because of the economic incentives we were talking about beforehand, which encourages you to go to the edge of the world to source cheap energy, it's becoming more decentralized all the time.
Yeah. All right, so let's switch to our last topic, but I wanted to show one more image that you also shared. So there are still countries that outlaw Bitcoin, which is funny, of course, because it's an open source computer protocol, and anyone can use it. So you could ban it, but you cannot stop anyone from using it. I saw Algeria here, Morocco.
So this is a great little image. This is put out by River. They put out some really nice data. But what it shows is that there are 15 countries who have unbanned Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining, and only 9 countries who still ban it. So you're in the minority. If you're still trying to ban the internet, ban gunpowder, ban Bitcoin, the same thing is happening that's happened to all of those industries, which is you're in a very increasingly lonely minority, and all you're doing is you're holding your country back.
And this is perfectly fine, right? Because this is also part of
which you're entitled to do
of the game theory. So yeah, this is great. All right, let's move on to Our last topic, which is the social and humanitarian value of Bitcoin. You brought you shared two things with me. I think this is one report.
Yeah, this is something I'm really excited about because, again, if you look at how is it that you're going to get more Bitcoin adoption in the general population, one thing I think we can all agree with is that this cycle, retail has really sat it out for the most part. The retail adoption has not increased in the US. Certainly, it was 48 million last year. It's 48 million this year. That's zero rate of increase. Other parts of the world are growing exponentially, but retail investors in the West do not seem to be. And part of the reason is that people are saying, well, is it really for me? It seems to be for my ideological enemies, which again, as we've discussed, it's a flawed way to look at it, but that is the neuro association that's there. So it's really important that we share stories which appear and appeal to people's values just right across the political spectrum. And one of the best ways to do that is to share more of the humanitarian benefits of Bitcoin. So this is why the Human Rights Foundation is one of the most important organizations we have, because they are continually promoting and documenting people who are using it for human rights, people who are using it for social good, day in, day out. Now, this report here is put together by the Digital Assets Research Institute. It was funded with the support of the Human Rights Foundation, and it was looking at how are people outside the West using Bitcoin, and particularly one community of people who hasn't been widely researched before, and that's refugees. And what they were interested in is saying, okay, we know that in theory, we've heard stories, we've heard anecdotes. There was the one through, I think, CNN a couple of years ago about the Ukrainian refugee. You probably heard it, Bram, who fled across the border, I think to Poland, and he had $2,000 on this little thumb drive, and it was in Bitcoin, and he used that in order to set up his livelihood again. And so then the question came, well, how many people like that are there around the world? And so the Digital Assets Research Institute put together a study, and they looked at how many refugees there were in the world. They looked at the Bitcoin adoption rates for these countries. They looked at whether you were more likely or less likely to use Bitcoin if you're a refugee. And they came up with some very conservative, actually, projections of how many people we think have been using it already. And the number was over 300,000 refugees have used Bitcoin to flee across borders. Now, this is phenomenal because what that means is two things. Number one, a lot of countries around the world are trying to stop the inflow of refugees because politically they're seen as being a drain on the economy. They bring nothing and we have to subsidize them and support them. That's the narrative, not from everyone, but from some people in the countries that refugees are coming into. But imagine if these refugees actually brought wealth with them. Of course, they bring many wealth. They bring cultural wealth, all sorts of wealth. But imagine if they also were able to bring financial wealth with them, which they can't currently. They have to leave everything behind. Try taking gold across the border. Try taking cash across the border. Try queuing at an ATM during the outbreak of war, as people tried to do in Ukraine when they have like $40 cash limits and queues that are 3 hours long, and you have to risk your life to queue to get a measly little bit of money. Not going to happen. But you can take Bitcoin across borders. So what happens if governments cannot freeze your bank accounts and you can take your money with you? Now you come to another country and you have the assets that you had. And if you're smart and you put all of your assets into the digital economy, you have 100% of your assets preserved and able to be reused anywhere in the world. That now completely changes the equation of how many refugees can be welcomed into the country. It stops that political pushback you might have. But more importantly, to the refugee themselves, it means that you can start with something rather than starting with nothing. It means you're not destitute. It means you don't have that feeling of being dependent upon other people to support you financially. You have something with which to reestablish your life. And 300,000 people have that. The projection is it'll be more than 6 million people by 2035. So I just find it fascinating that it's still possible. People can say, where's the use case for Bitcoin? We're right under our own eyes. Just one community of people, we're seeing one of the most phenomenal use cases at an existential level towards the basic human dignity of being able to take your assets with you when you're forced to flee across a border. It's extremely exciting. And it's one of the stories that that when people hear those stories, they start to soften their stance towards Bitcoin. They start to realize that, okay, yeah, my political enemies might be using it, but so are destitute people. So are people in war-torn countries. And maybe I need to look a little bit outside my own world of privilege to the way the rest of the world looks, to a little bit more than what I have today. Open up my eyes and say, wow, this is actually solving some existential problems. And you start there, and then before you know it, you realize that for every refugee who's using Bitcoin, there are maybe 30 people who are using it within their country in a way which is just important, either to avoid the erosion of wealth through hyperinflation, to be able to receive remittance payments and not lose 15% of it, or simply to be able to protest against your government safely without fear of being tracked or having reprisals or having your funding cut for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And Bitcoin provides all of that.
It already immediately shows you that the system you're participating in doesn't make you an actor, but rather a subject, right? And so there is no difference in that sense, again, between basically people anywhere in the world, because all the money systems are the same. So you are just lucky if you're in a Western country, but you eventually have the same problem. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this today, but this is a new essay from Alex Gladstein, who's Chief Strategy Officer at Human Rights Foundation. Yeah, very cool. It's why Bitcoin is freedom money, and it's like a collection of these stories. So there's nine parts. So if you look up Gladstein on X, you can find this post, and then there's amazing examples of using Bitcoin as a currency inside Afghanistan. How French colonial history in Central and West Africa. By the way, also amazing, right? The Central African franc, where there's like 7 countries, I think, that use the currency that France still controls and prints. Right? So yeah, Bitcoin is a solution to problems that are here today. Maybe not where you live in the Western world, but slowly but surely, by the way, but definitely in other places in the world. And so I thought this was a really interesting publication that I put on my reading list.
Yeah, it's really important work. And my goodness, once you start looking into the Central African franc and you realized just what a freedom-removing system that is, to have your whole national currency printed in another country and therefore able to be debased within another country without your permission overnight, as has happened multiple times, and wake up in the morning and find that the dollars, well, they're not dollars, but the currency you hold is now worth 40% less. You can only buy 60% of what you used to yesterday. It's unfathomable. But this is the reality of many countries in the world.
Yeah, well, and the natural resources export of your country to the country that is creating your currency. That's the most obvious scam
it's a complete scam. Yeah, military colonialism is finished, but a much better instrument and a much more subtle and invasive one has taken its place, which is financial colonialism. And that's exactly the way it works, because, you debase the currency, suddenly you can extract uranium for the French nuclear program, for a song from these countries that were former colonies, but really effectively still are. It's incredible. You just look at the economics of it. And the funny thing is that any country, you might say, well, why don't they form their own currency? But, there's a funny thing that happens when these former French colonies do that. Then suddenly, coincidentally, there's these coups that just randomly happen. These people get replaced. It's very coincidental, and it seems to happen routinely. Every single time, without fail, when someone tries to institute their own currency. But you can't do that with Bitcoin. So it's really is hope for not just these 14 countries that are on the Central African franc, and not just the entire African continent. But as you say, we're starting to see how even in the West, we don't see it to the same extent, but we're starting to get hints of it. And we're not immune to some of these same issues ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think this were like, or are three topics that are, in my opinion, also not talked about enough. Perhaps they, well, I think definitely they are more impactful than just price going up. That gets a lot of attention, obviously. But yeah, I think this also kind of shows that it is not an investment, right? It is just way, way more than you think on the surface, and it takes time to see that, right? But I think it's very cool that, you know, compared to 2013, 14, 15, yeah, this wasn't even in the picture, right? And within 10 years, we have very serious things going on that. Yeah, actually make the case for Bitcoin even more substantial, right? And I think also the possibility of it surviving and becoming the thing that we think it is also bigger. So I think it's very, very cool that we got to shed a light on that. Is there anything that you would want to add to what we discussed that you think we missed?
I'll just say one thing, and that is that number go up and freedom go up really go hand in hand. One supports the other, because the ironic thing is, when number goes up, then a lot of these freedom go up projects become more viable, of course, because there's just more money in the whole ecosystem. And similarly, when we allow these stories about freedom go up, these stories about that Alex Gladstein's telling, Human Rights Foundation's telling, the Digital Assets Research Institute's telling, about how Bitcoin is being used as a tool of freedom around the world, it inspires people in sovereign funds and pension funds. It inspires governments, it inspires regulators, it inspires policymakers, it inspires retail investors to get behind Bitcoin. And that has an impact on number go up. So I don't see them as these distinct groups. I see that one supports the other, and they both go very much hand in hand. So I know there's a lot of people who say, well, why are we talking about sovereign funds and pension funds? That's not what Bitcoin is about. Bitcoin's about everything. It's like, that's like saying we shouldn't have banks using the internet. It's like everyone can use the internet. Institutional investors can use it. Peace activists can use it. It's a tool which is going to create net good for humanity across the board in some very, very unique ways. So number go up and freedom go up. They support each other.
Awesome. I think that's a great wrap up. Thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. And yeah, now maybe we can have a certain cadence with a bit little less time in between. But I think we'll definitely.
Well, these things are evolving. These stories are evolving pretty fast, aren't they? So that'll be fun.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.